Well, happy Mother's Day again to you. It is time for an encouraging and somewhat unusual Mother's Day message. Here we go. So I was thinking about taking a break from the series of messages we've been in, which we are doing now, taking a break just for today, and preaching a message just for Mother's Day. And as I was thinking about it, I was praying. I said, God, what should we talk about? Where would you lead us on Mother's Day? In the middle of that, about 6 weeks ago, I saw a meme, not a meme, a meme, that was posted by one of my friends on Facebook. Have you ever been on Facebook? It's weird. Yeah, so they posted, this was a woman, a friend of mine. She's about my age. She's a follower of Jesus. She's a great person, actually. She's a very beautiful person. And she posted this meme, and I'll bring it up for you here. This, I didn't know what to do with this at first. It just said this. It said, I don't just want to be pretty. I want to be, I see Jesus in her. I don't just want to be pretty. I want to be, I see Jesus in her. And ever since I saw this, it stuck in my mind. In fact, I couldn't figure out what to do with it. One part of me said, well, is she saying that, she could become so physically beautiful that it would be like experiencing God to be in her presence? That seems like a really wrong thing to say. But another part of me thought, well, or maybe is she saying that, somehow she's going to, instead of just being pretty on the outside, she's going to be beautiful on the inside, be changed into the character that Jesus has, and somehow reflect his beauty. Because that would be a fantastic thing to say. So this is a good friend of mine, and I hope she took this well. So I wrote on the post, I said, I don't know what to do with this. This is either blasphemy or it's the true meaning of beauty. I can't decide which one it is. Depends on what you meant when you posted it. All right, so today we're going to be talking about true beauty. What is beauty? How do we become more beautiful? I know guys out there, all the guys watching this, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yes, that's what I've been trying to do my whole life, is become more beautiful. No, probably not. That's not something I ever thought about growing up. But for the women who are watching, for the moms, for the spiritual moms, this is something that's been put into you by your Creator. In fact, it's something that's in men in a different way, maybe, in some men to different degrees, but in many, many women, there's this strong desire to be and to become more beautiful. Often when you're young, you're a teenager, that's expressed in trying to become physically as beautiful as possible, which is not a bad thing. That's something that God put in place. But as we're going to see today, that's not where we need to stop. We need to go beyond that to true beauty. True beauty. We're going to talk about what that is, where it comes from. We're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 3 today. We're also going to look at a couple of Psalms, Psalm 27 and Psalm 34 to start out. We've been talking about Peter for a while. We're going to be looking at the rest of the book of 1 Peter and then 2 Peter as we go through this series of messages that we're in right now. But for this one, 1 Peter 3, Peter has some things to say to wives and to husbands about how to live with their wives. And as he does, because most of those wives were mothers, and actually all of them were at least spiritual mothers, he is speaking to us about how mothers should live, how they should become more and more beautiful, and how we should treat them if we want to follow after God and see his purposes fulfilled in the world. So this is an important message today. It's going to be a little bit unusual because as you see when you read these verses, when I read them in a few minutes, you're going to be like, he's going to read those verses on Mother's Day? Yeah, we are. And it's going to be great. Just stick with me. All right, so Peter was also a guy, a little bit more context about him. He was a guy who was he was a married man. Even in the time when he was called to go and follow Jesus around physically. If you don't know, Peter was one of Jesus' disciples or his close group of friends that literally left their jobs and went and followed after him for about 3 years. During that time, Peter was already married and had kids. The other disciples, maybe some of them were, but we don't know. Most of them probably were not. So Peter is in a bit of a unique position that way. Peter knows he has a lot of experience about how to balance following after God with a wife and children, how to honor her, even when he's not at home, right? He has to go and leave home. He has to actually leave her, not break up with her, but leave her for a period of maybe years or at least months at a time. There might have been times when she was together with the disciples who were following Jesus. There's a really a poignant or heartwarming story that happens in the beginning of the book of Mark, which is one of the books about Jesus' life, where Peter is about to go off with Jesus, and his wife, he's about to leave her with the kids at home. He's going to go wander around following this guy with no income. How would that feel, moms? Your husband's about to take off for maybe 3 years, and he doesn't have a job anymore. He just quit. And he just says we should trust God. Well, his wife was actually a woman of great faith, and she did trust God, but that must have been very hard for her. On top of that, we find out in the beginning of Mark that at that moment when Peter was about to leave and go follow after Jesus, her mom, Peter's mother-in-law, was sick. Maybe even sick to the point where she was in danger of dying. And Peter's supposed to be leaving at this moment. And the amazing, heartwarming part of this story is that Jesus shows up at their house before he just takes Peter off to go do the things that Peter needs to do and become the man he was supposed to become. He shows up at Peter's house. He goes in to see Peter's mother-in-law and he heals her. He makes sure to honor the mothers in his life, in that case, not his mother, but Peter's mother-in-law. Make sure to honor her and honor Peter's wife so that they're okay to continue even while Peter's away. It's powerful. So as we see these words from Peter in just a moment, recognize who he is, who it is that's speaking. He has a lot of experience here, and this is not a man who is domineering or being mean to his wife or his mother-in-law. He cares about them very much, and he watched Jesus care for them as well. All right. So let's go through a couple of Psalms here first. First Psalm we're going to land on is Psalm 27 and verse 4. And in this Psalm, we see something about beauty. We're exploring what is the nature of true beauty. What is beauty like? What is it for? For a bunch of the guys watching, a waste of time and money. Maybe that's what it is. No. It's not. Just because it's not your thing doesn't mean it's a waste of time and money. In fact, maybe it's what you need in your life more than anything else. You knew that. Husbands, you knew that when you were first dating your wife. You knew that beauty is something you needed in your life, maybe more than anything else. Do you remember? Have you forgotten? All right, so true beauty, how can we know that it's something very important to life? Well, think about this for a moment. God is beautiful. Maybe that's not a way we think of God very often. God is actually described in masculine terms much of the time, but not all of the time in the Bible. God is described as Father, and that is a right way, the best way, the most often we will think of him that way. But God is a life-giving spirit. He created in his image both male and female, and it takes both to reflect his image fully. And we find out in a number of places, including Psalm 27, verse 4, that God is beautiful. So check this out. This is King David, ancient Israelite king, writing a song, writing lyrics to a song about what his relationship with God is like. And here's what he says. One thing I asked from the Lord. This only do I seek. So if there's one thing I want to get out of life, forget about all the other stuff. If I could have only one thing out of life, what would it be? That I may dwell in the house of the Lord. What? If I could get one thing out of life, the most important thing that I want to get is just that I can be close to God. When he says the house of the Lord, he means the temple. In his time, that's where God had his presence rest, was in the temple in Jerusalem. That's not true anymore. God's presence is everywhere. It's especially inside people who have given their lives to him through Jesus. God's presence is everywhere. And what David is saying is the one thing I want out of life is to be close to God. Why? Why would that be so important? To dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. So here he says, the one thing I want out of life is to be close to God. Why? Because God is beautiful. I want to be close to him so that I can see his beauty and seek him, go after him, be close to him, try to become more like him. Why is beauty so important to him? Well, there's a lot of things we could say here, but this is the effect that beauty has on us as human beings. Whether we're men or women, children, beauty has the effect of causing us to want to stop and pay attention to it. And this is God-given. And beauty has the effect of transforming us in subtle but powerful ways on the inside. You ever heard the expression, stop and smell the roses, right? If you actually do that sometime, let's say you're having a hard time or you're in a bad mood or you're anxious or worried or sad about something, if you go to a rose garden in the sunshine and you take the time to pay attention, roses are beautiful, right? Everybody say, yeah. Maybe you've never really paid attention to that. If you take the time to literally smell a rose and look at it and think about its beauty, it will transform the way you're thinking and feeling in the inside. Now, maybe that one small thing won't change your entire life. Maybe it might, but it will transform you on the inside. This is the effect that beauty has on us. And so we see this is part of why, and we're going to see this more in a moment in the next psalm, this is part of why David wants to be close to God, to gaze on his beauty so that he can be transformed. It's a place of safety and peace for him. The beauty of God can accomplish something in his life that nothing else can, turning his heart. All right, next psalm we're going to look at in Psalm 34. This is another psalm written by the same guy. When I say psalm, it sounds kind of like song, and that's okay because they're really kind of the same thing. These are ancient poems that were actually sung as lyrics to worship songs in ancient Israel. And this one, Psalm 34, is actually one that Peter, we're going to go to Peter in a minute, he had it in mind when he wrote 1 Peter chapter 3, which we're going to look at. How do I know he had it in mind? Because he quotes it. He quotes a big section of this particular psalm in chapter 3. So, and he also, we'll see in a minute, he talks about a few of the things that are listed here. I'm not going to read the part that he quotes in chapter 3, but we're going to read a different part, and you'll see as we read the part in chapter 3, he was thinking about these things, because he's going to talk in chapter 3 about fear and about different ways our faces toward God, God's face toward us. All right, here's Psalm 34, verses 4 and 5. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him, remember we were just talking about in Psalm 27, he's gazing on the beauty of the Lord, looking to God. Here again, those who look to God are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. Their faces are never covered with shame. There's a few things going on here that we can take away about the nature of beauty. Beauty transforms. We've already said that. How does it transform? When we look upon the beauty of God, so he's seeking after God, he's paying attention to God, he's seeing God's beauty. The result is that he's delivered from all fear. That's kind of like what we said before with stopping and smelling the roses, except now to a much higher degree, because it's not just the beauty of a rose that David is paying attention to. It's the beauty of the creator of the universe himself. The ultimate beauty, the source of all beauty. And when he pays attention to that beauty, actually it transforms him so deeply that while he is looking at the beauty of God, fear cannot stand in his heart. It destroys it. It removes it. All his fears are gone. It transforms him and actually makes him radiant. What does it mean to be radiant? Well, radiant means, of course, to be sending out light, right? He's glowing in some way. Maybe not literally, physically glowing, but he's glowing in, why? Why is he glowing? He is, in fact, talking about reflecting the beauty of God himself. So think about it this way. When you look at the rose, you stop and smell the roses, you are transformed a little bit on the inside. And if someone were to see you after that, they would get more of a sense of peace and joy from you. You are in some way reflecting a little bit of the beauty that you experienced in the rose. You might think about this with couples, right? When a guy first falls in love, he reflects the beauty of the one who he has fallen in love with joy. And that shows to the people around him. You can see when somebody is in love, can't you? Yeah, you can. It's remarkable. And as we move up, right, a rose is one level, falling in love with another person is the next level. Seeing the beauty of God is even beyond that. It will transform us until we can radiate, reflect back his own beauty. So that's the first point you can write down for today, and we'll have it on the board here. The true beauty is a reflection of God. True beauty is a reflection of God. That's true of physical beauty, which comes from him and is given by him. It's also true of a deeper inner beauty that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so there we are. Now we're going to jump into 1 Peter chapter 3. We're going to look at these words of Peter. Now, word of warning and a plea to stay with me for all the moms out there. A friend of mine, we were talking about, what are you going to preach on Mother's Day? And I'm like, 1 Peter chapter 3. And he was like, you are out of your mind. You can't do that. And I was like, well, I think God wants me to do it, so I'm just going to do it. There are some words in here that often trigger women in our modern culture and society today. So this very first verse we're going to pull up in just a minute, not quite yet. Keep it off the screen. Keep it on, not yet. Okay, this very first verse is going to say, it's going to have the word submit in it. Peter's going to talk to wives, and the first thing he's going to say is, wives, submit to your husbands. And then later on in the stuff that we're reading, he's going to talk about how Sarah obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. Now, this is not a message about how wives are supposed to relate to their husbands mostly today. We're going to come back next week and talk a little bit more about submission in the context of the end of chapter 2 in 1 Peter and all of the first half of chapter 3. Because in these sections, Peter is going to say a lot about submission to all of us, not just to women, not just to wives. He's going to talk about husbands submitting. He's going to talk about slaves submitting. He's going to talk about everybody submitting to each other in different ways. And that context is going to help us. So we're not going to deal with the submission part mostly today. We're going to use these verses to look at what is the meaning of true beauty. And if you can just either put on hold some of the stuff, if that triggers you, put it on hold a little bit, and look at the parts that I'm going to focus us on today, I think you're going to walk away, if you are a mother, a wife, you're going to walk away with a life-giving message from God's word. Life-giving truth. So don't let any trigger words get in your way. If you are super triggered, I did a message back in October. So if you go on our YouTube channel, October 18th, 2020, we did a message on women, the role of women in the Bible, the role of women in life. And that message has a lot about what the Bible actually means and why this is a life-giving truth. So if you get stuck, you can go back to that one or wait for next week. So 1 Peter chapter 3, remember we're looking at true beauty here. We're going to learn a few more things from Peter. The first 4 verses to begin with. Wives, in the same way, now I will pause there, in the same way he's just talked about how Jesus submitted himself to the human government authorities who tortured him and killed him. He submitted himself to them because he was submitting himself to God's plan, even though they did the worst thing imaginable to him. But through that, we are brought life. By his wounds, we are healed. So he's just talked about Jesus' submission to God by submitting to the government authorities. And now he says in the same way, wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. We're going to pause there. Go back to the first couple of verses on the screen. All right, so what can we draw out of this? We've said that true beauty, first of all, God is beautiful, and we've said that true beauty is a reflection of God. In order to have true beauty, you must reflect God. Peter is here speaking to the wives, to the mothers, to the women who are reading his letter, because they have, more than the men, this inbuilt, innate desire to become more beautiful. And he's saying to them, that's not a bad thing, that's given by God. But you got to become more beautiful in the right way so that you can reflect the beauty of God, be radiant, and change the people and the world around you by God's power. That is the power of the beautiful women in our lives. And I'm not talking about physical beauty here, although they are. Moms, you're beautiful. And that beauty, as it grows, as you get older, as you have laid down your life for your children, that beauty should be growing in this inner way so that you can reflect more and more fully the beauty of God. That beauty is desperately needed in the world around us. And men, don't underestimate it. Though it's not our calling in the same way, we need it in our lives. We need it. We cannot fulfill the purposes of God, not fully, without it. So what can we learn about that beauty here from these first couple of verses? What we can learn, number one, is that beauty is very powerful. Look what it can do in this first verse. We already talked about how it can transform our inner life, seeing beauty. It can transform even where our hearts are at. Again, think about a young couple who's in love, right? I think about a lot of teenagers who I know, and I watch the transition. They're obsessed with video games, and then all of a sudden, video games don't really matter that much anymore. And something else has grabbed the attention of their heart, the beauty of another person. That's powerful right there. It's actually incredibly powerful, and we see it here. What's being imagined here is wives who are married to husbands who are not believers, who are not Christians. This happens very often today. It happened even more often in those early days because many of these women became followers of Jesus after they were married. And so their husbands don't believe in any of this stuff. They don't think Jesus is real. They don't believe the Bible. They're not going to church, none of that. So what's she supposed to do, right? I mean, she could be afraid for that relationship. The wife could choose to be afraid for her husband and so go to him and talk to him and tell him about Jesus all the time. She could do that. She could try to manipulate and control and use whatever means she has to force him to get to church. If I could just get him to church, make it happen. She could do that. But that's not what Peter recommends. What Peter recommends actually is that she focus on the purity and reverence of her life. We'll talk about that in a second. But as her beauty, as she is able to reflect in her inner self, not just in her physical appearance, in her inner self, the beauty of God himself, her husband will be won over. Actually, his desire to follow after God will grow because he sees the beauty of God reflected in her. That's the power. It's the power to actually be used by God to turn someone's heart toward him. To turn someone's heart, to change someone's life, to save someone's soul. Not all by herself, by God's power, reflected through her as she reflects the beauty of the Lord. The purity and reverence of her life is what she should be focusing on. What does that mean? Does it mean she's supposed to walk around with her hands folded and never talk or be loud? No, it doesn't. Purity means, in its most basic sense, a desire to go after one thing. Purity means not many things, but one thing. Just like we saw David in Psalm 27, that is a great illustration of purity of heart. Purity means I desire one thing. I desire God above all else. I desire to know him and see his beauty above everything else. Yeah, there's lots of other good things in life, but I don't allow my heart to go after those things first. I make God himself the first that I go after. That's purity. Reverence, trusting God, fearing him, allowing God's plan to be the plan that I follow, not trying to control everything myself. Let's go on to the next couple of verses here. We already read them. Here he says, he makes a distinction between physical beauty and a different kind of beauty, a deeper, more powerful beauty. That's beauty of the inner self. He says your beauty should not come primarily from outward adornment, things that you do on the outside to make yourself physically attractive and beautiful. That's maybe a place to start. For those of you who are moms, women, that's a good place to start when you're children and teenagers. It doesn't mean, by the way, that women should not try to make themselves physically beautiful. That's not what Peter is saying. I'm sure Peter appreciated it when his wife dressed nicely and took care of herself. I'm sure he appreciated her beauty. What Peter is saying is the thing that Jesus says to us again and again. The physical is of some importance, but by comparison to the spiritual, it's almost like it's nothing. It's of very little value when compared with the spiritual. And so as you get older, especially, you become a mom and you grow in that. You become a more mature mom and then a grandmother. You should be focusing more and more on the growth of your inner beauty. That's where your beauty should be sourced. That's where it should come from. That's where it should have its origin. So we see here, it should be that of your inner self, your beauty, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. What is a gentle and quiet spirit? Again, it doesn't mean that women are like supposed to not talk or something like that. That's a weird distortion of what the Bible says. Many women are leaders in the Bible. What it means, and this is actually a call to both men and women, Peter here is making the appeal to women on the basis of their desire for beauty. But the call to be gentle and quiet of spirit is a call in the New Testament, in the Bible, to both men and women. If you think about the fruit of the Spirit, a passage in Galatians 5 that tells us, what it is God is trying to do in each of us. This same thought, and even this very word, gentleness, is right there. What is God trying to make us like on the inside? All of us. He's trying to make us full of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and self-control. That's remarkable. That's the very same idea that's described here. So this is not just a call to women, but in particular here, he is appealing to the wives, to the mothers, on the basis of their desire for beauty. Here's how you should use that desire, that God-given desire that you have. Use it to develop this aspect of gentleness and quietness of spirit. What is that? I think at the most basic level, it is trusting in God. It's not trying to take control of the situations of your life on your own. It's trusting that God has given. He's got a good plan for your life. There are some things that you can affect and influence, and you should affect and influence those things for good to the best of your ability. But the things that you can't control, relationships, can't fully control those. What your children choose to do, whether people live or die, the things that you can't control, in gentleness and quietness of spirit, you release control of those to God. That's a way of developing the beauty of God on the inside. So the next point that you can write down for today is true beauty is gentle and quiet because it trusts God. True beauty is gentle and quiet because it trusts God. All right, let's read the next couple of verses here. We got one more point that's directed primarily to the wives, to the mothers, and then we'll have a point directed toward the husbands and everybody else and how they're going to treat their wives and mothers. That's going to be a fun one for the moms. Okay, here we go. Next verses here. For this is the way, focusing on that gentleness and quiet of spirit, inner beauty. This is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. This is how they actually did the work of making themselves beautiful. They submitted themselves to their own husbands. Like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord, you are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Let's pause there on the screen. So again, I know there might be a couple of words that are trigger words for some of you, but let's just focus for today on some of the other aspects here. We'll come back to submission and talk about that a little bit more next week. But this is remarkable. This is actually the work that they do. These women, he's talking about women of the past, great women of the Bible, or even great women maybe who aren't written about in the Bible, but who put their hope in God. How did they seek to make themselves beautiful? Not primarily by putting their energy and attention into physical beauty, but primarily by trusting God in the circumstances of their life that they can't control. By trusting him. Think about Sarah for a moment. She is held up here. If you know that story, she is Abraham's wife. Abraham is the founder of the nation of Israel, the people of God. God called him. He had this special calling on his life, and he screwed up a whole bunch of times, right? Now, in between Abraham and Sarah, Sarah was his wife. She is by no means a doormat or just a silent woman who does nothing in the relationship. In fact, in the stories between Abraham and Sarah, we see Sarah leading a number of times. And we see actually there are moments when Sarah seems to know the right thing to do when Abraham doesn't. There are also moments the other way around where Abraham sees the right thing to do and Sarah doesn't. But what we see is that in those moments, because she is committed to the relationship, she does not try to control things. Even when she knows, in a few instances in particular, that Abraham is doing something, he's making a decision that is actually the wrong way, and it's going to get them in trouble. No doubt she voices her opinion. We don't have the record of that in the Bible, but no doubt she does. But ultimately, when he makes that decision and she can't get him to turn by talking with him, she actually goes along with it so that they can stay together. She values the relationship, and she trusts God as she submits to her husband. And because of that, because of her trust of God, that is where the beauty of God is able to be reflected through her more and more. As she trusts him, it says here, you are her daughters. You are the daughters of Abraham if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. You see, this is the temptation for mothers. Think about this for a moment. Who loves you the most in your life? Hopefully an answer came to all of your minds. For most of us, it's going to be our mom or our wife. Unless, I guess, you are a mom and your mom's... there could be a lot of things we could say here, but who loves us the most in our lives? We know that moms love very, very deeply, don't we? That love can become a temptation because the love is so strong. That love, moms, that can become a temptation to try to control a situation that is really outside of your control. To try to control a relationship that's really outside of your control. My child, who I love, seems to be going the right way. Oh, sorry, not the right way. The wrong way. seems to be making bad choices. My child who I love is not following after Jesus. My child who I love is making choices that are going to hurt them in their life. The temptation, because you love them so much, is to try to control that situation. Somehow, any way you can, but you can't. And this is what Peter is showing us here, that the real power, there is power. You can seek true beauty by releasing, not giving into that fear, releasing control of what you can't control to God, trusting him in it. And as your beauty grows, as you seek God first, he will use you more and more to influence the people around you. This is God's call. It's powerful. All right, next verse, we're going to look at a couple here. Well, the point there you can write down is this. True beauty follows God without fear. I think for the moms, somehow I really think this is the verse, as I thought about this is the verse that stands out to me the most that we just read. You are her daughters. You're daughters of Sarah, through whom the whole world, the whole history of the world was changed by the beauty of the gentleness and quietness of her spirit. The beauty of God reflected in her. The whole world was changed through that. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. If anything out of this message, I think that's the piece that God is speaking today that is going to free you and give you life. All right, now a word to the husbands and everybody else on Mother's Day. How are you going to honor your mom, and why should you do it? Isn't it just, I mean, come on, does she really need me to do all this stuff for her? Isn't it just a big ripoff with how much flowers cost? I mean, how much are you going to spend on flowers for Mother's Day? My neighbor yesterday told me that he knew somebody who spent $250 on flowers for Mother's Day. It's ridiculous, man. Come on. I mean, mothers aren't worth that, are they? Come on. Okay. No, they are. I mean, I'm not saying you need to spend $250. It's not about that. Let's read this next verse. Check this out. Husbands, in the same way that Christ submitted and died, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Sometimes we read that verse and just get triggered and say, women are not weaker. We shouldn't. But in Peter's time, everyone understood. He wasn't saying that women are weaker in every way than men. We've already talked about. He's just talked about their great power to change the world. Everyone who read this knew that he was talking about that women are weaker in a particular way. What is that way? These are my wife's flowers. They're on I need to put them back very carefully on our front door after I am done here today. I asked her, and she was very nice to let me bring them to church. Now, you can see, when I put them in the car, do you think I just threw them in the back of the car like I would throw, a stack of books or a propane tank, which I put in the back of my car often? How do you think I set these in the back of my car? Very carefully. These flowers are beautiful, aren't they? And if I set them in my car, I also put up things around them to make sure they didn't tip over. Because what's going to happen if something falls on these flowers, or they tip over, or they get smashed into something? You can already see just the shaking of these flowers in the car has caused one of them to fall. Beauty is fragile. That's just its nature. So it's not some awful thing that we're saying that the wives are the weaker partner. What's being said here is that she actually is the one, primarily, who's called toward the beauty, to reflect the beauty of God. She is full of love for her children, for her husband, for those around her in a different way than men, in a way that is unique and God-given and changes the world. That is her strength, but the very nature of that beauty is that it's fragile. The very nature of that beauty is that it has to be taken care of and honored in a particular way, or else it can crumble and be crushed. That's just how it is. That's how God made it. So when we talk about Mother's Day or any other day, why do our moms and wives have such a need to be with us, to spend so much time together? My kids, who are all boys, groan when we talk about, oh, we have to have a family picture after church, and we have to spend the whole afternoon with mom. That's what she wants. Playing games, eating food together. Oh, can't I just go back to my video games? No, you can't. Because she is the beauty that God has placed in your life. And you desperately need that beauty to be in full effect. And it needs special treatment. It needs special care. We got to take care of it, not just throw it around like we would. You don't treat the boys quite the same way. We need to take special care of it. And so on this Mother's Day, what are you going to do to honor your mother? What are you going to do to help fill that need that she has because she's so full of love? Because she is called to reflect the beauty of God. See the good things in her. That's incredibly important. Look for them. Just like you need to sometimes stop and smell the roses, stop and pay attention to the mothers in your life. They are beautiful. See it. More than anything else you do, sometimes men approach Mother's Day like, okay, what are the things we got to get checked off the list? So many times I've approached it that way. It's not about that. It's not about exactly what meal do you have or exactly what flowers do you get. Did they cost $250 or $15? You can't find flowers for $15, not good ones. It's not about that, though. It's about, did you see the beauty of her spirit? And did you spend time with her and show her that you love her? That's what you got to do today. That's God's calling on our life. So that's our last point for this morning. Treat her with special honor and respect. Treat her with special honor and respect. Let's pray now, and we'll continue in worship.